Final Fantasy VII Remake was met with somewhat mixed reception upon its release, though it garnered predominantly positive feedback. While some longtime fans expressed certain grievances with the game, the overall sentiment was one of appreciation, witnessing the iconic rotting pizza of Midgar brought to life in vivid 3D with modern graphics was a nostalgic yet refreshing experience. The developers aimed to remain faithful to the original game while introducing new elements such as the engaging weapon upgrade system and an action-first combat system. In addition to gameplay enhancements, the remake took some narrative liberties. If you're still with me at this point in the video, I'd like to give you a heads up. This segment will be loaded with spoilers. Although the original game has been out for quite some time, I want to make it clear that we'll be delving deep into spoiler territory. Feel free to bail out now if you prefer to avoid any plot revelations. With all that being said, welcome to the Abyss, folks. My name is Void Money, and today we're going to talk about one of the things that I believe set Final Fantasy VII apart from the other games in the series. Final Fantasy games are renowned for their high-stakes, world-ending events, a characteristic that resonates with most fans throughout the series. However, Final Fantasy VII stands out in a unique way, elevating the stakes to an even more poignant level. This distinctive element contributes significantly to why many fans consider Final Fantasy VII the pinnacle of the series. Allow me to illustrate this point with a short clip from the original game. As you might have guessed, the pivotal event that sets Final Fantasy VII apart is Aerith's death. While the demise of major characters is not uncommon in other Final Fantasy games, Aerith's death strikes a particularly deep chord. She not only serves as Cloud's primary love interest, but is also a crucial member of the main party, meeting her tragic end relatively early in the game's narrative. This poignant moment, regardless of personal feelings towards Aerith, unfolds as a true tragedy in every sense. Her death stands as a somber and remarkable chapter in video game history, leaving an undeniable mark on players' emotions. The remake delves deeper into the relationships between secondary characters like Aerith and Tifa, giving them more individuality and making it challenging for fans to simply align with Camp Aerith or Camp Tifa. The dating minigame, where players accumulate hidden points for their preferred character, used to determine the date companion at the Gold Saucer, added another layer of complexity to these relationships, affecting various cutscenes. Furthermore, the prior knowledge of Aerith's eventual death creates a dilemma for some fans. The prospect of investing time in leveling her character, only to face the inevitable loss, adds another layer to the player's experience. Knowing what we know, why would one invest time in leveling up and developing Aerith? Well, for any reason other than to get the achievement for using Great Gospel, that is. In the broader Final Fantasy VII franchise, another character, Zack Fair, plays a minor yet crucial role. Throughout the original game's events, a carefully crafted side story unfolds, gradually revealing details about Zack's impact on the lives of Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith. This intricate web of relationships turns the triangle into more of a square, or perhaps even a rhombus. Despite sharing similar ages, the characters engage in various friendly or flirtatious interactions. Unfortunately, Zack's character has limited screen time in the original game, leaving players with only a shadow of the rich connections he shared with the main cast. Zack's surprising and also confusing cameo from the remake received a lot of reactions from fans, as you may remember. We will take the time to analyze it a little further, however, before passing judgment. There are three likely explanations I'd like to take the time to consider, and the first one is the Multiverse Theory, which seems to be the more plausible explanation. According to this theory, the standard timeline branches into several paths, each taking a different direction when a major event concludes in a distinct ending. This approach allows the developers to keep the story fresh and surprising, as major events such as character deaths might unfold differently in each branch of the multiverse. Within the context of the remake, the cutscene depicting Zack's survival could be interpreted as a glimpse into an alternative timeline within the multiverse where he manages to survive. However, it's worth noting that not everyone perceives the scene in the same way, and interpretations may vary among fans. Regardless of how one views the scene, it's evident that the remake introduces variations in the way certain deaths play out compared to the original game. In the original game, none of the 3 Avalanche companions we met in the beginning survived the fall of the Sector 7 plate. However, the remake took a different approach. Although Jesse was critically wounded and crushed under the plate, both Wedge and Biggs managed to survive. Unfortunately, Wedge's reprieve was short-lived, as he was killed by the Whispers several chapters later. This introduces the concept of the Whispers, a new addition to the remake. Aerith drops hints about the possibilities of changing time, providing an explanation for the divergent events in the remake compared to the original. The Whispers play a significant role in shaping the narrative and introducing alterations that contribute to the evolving storyline. Their role is that of timeline maintenance, where significant changes to the timeline draw them out of whichever realm they originate from, and they combat the player characters in order to restore the timeline. This hypothesis provides a cohesive explanation for the Whisper's role in preventing deviations from the established narrative. It also rationalizes the differing outcomes of the 3 Avalanche characters' deaths, and the cutscene revealing Zack's survival, suggesting that the events are subject to manipulation within the confines of a singular timeline influenced by ancient techniques, perhaps known by Aerith. The unfolding storyline in subsequent installments of the series may shed more light on these complex time-related elements and Aerith's connection to them. But for now, we can only wait to see how this possibility might play out. Your concern about the potential impact on the storytelling and stakes in Final Fantasy VII due to changes in characters' fates is valid. If Zack is indeed alive in this timeline, it could be perceived as diminishing the gravity of his original death, which played a significant role in shaping the emotional depth of the story. The original game's impact was, in part, derived from the high stakes created by the deaths of major characters, contributing to the memorable and emotionally resonant nature of Final Fantasy VII. The introduction of time travel or alternate timelines, if not handled correctly, may risk diluting the narrative tension and emotional weight that made the original story so powerful. The fear of a potential happily ever after scenario through time manipulation or constant resurrections could undermine the integrity of the story. It's essential to keep in mind that storytelling preferences can vary among fans, and while some may appreciate the introduction of new elements, others may find it less satisfying. As we think about this, the impact of the story, while significant to us individually, is ultimately a fictional experience, and each person's interpretation and reaction to it may differ. Let's hope that future installments of the series maintain the essence of the original while introducing fresh and compelling elements without sacrificing the core elements that made Final Fantasy VII so good. The third possibility I'd like to bring up is an interesting perspective, that the differences in character fates and events might not ultimately matter in the grand scheme of the story, and that the Whispers will ensure a certain continuity. This approach introduces a level of unpredictability, as demonstrated by the varying outcomes of character deaths, such as Jesse's and Wedge's. However, I am still inclined towards favoring the multiverse theory. Zack's survival being an event in another timeline was hinted at during the scene with Zack near the end of the game, and it seems to align with the idea of different timelines coexisting. This raises questions about the significance of showing events from an alternate timeline, especially if it's assumed that there's no direct interaction with that alternate universe. If the multiverse theory holds, it could suggest that the narrative is exploring the interconnectedness of these timelines, or that events in one timeline might have indirect consequences on another. The reasons for showing events from an alternate timeline may become clearer in future installments as the story unfolds and the implications of these divergent paths are explored further. Until then, these theories offer fans a grounds for speculation and discussion as the evolving story expands. But one must question why the alternate timeline scene with Zack is included if it is indeed in an alternate timeline, unless it is in fact relevant to what's going on in the story. It suggests that perhaps different multiverses do have relationships with one another, in so much as it's possible to interact with people from different timelines. If not, why even include it? Ergo, it must be relevant to the story. If this is the case, it would explain why the scene was even included in the game at all, if it is indeed happening in an alternate universe's timeline. And of course, if you follow that line of reasoning to its logical conclusion, you will come to the possibility that the timeline where Zack survives will converge with the timeline where he doesn't, either bringing the alternate version of him into the timeline that we are playing in, or merging both timelines entirely so that he didn't die at all. The counterpoint to weigh against this is that this is a different story from the original Final Fantasy VII, so perhaps things are just going to play out differently. Now, if we take this multiverse possibility and remind ourselves of the point I made earlier in the video, there is one more plot point to consider. Aerith's death never happens. Concerns have already been raised about the potential for retconning major deaths, particularly those of Aerith and Zack in the Final Fantasy VII Remake series. The impact of these deaths is deeply ingrained in the emotional resonance and narrative gravity of the original Final Fantasy VII. If the story were to deviate significantly, altering these key events, it could indeed cheapen the emotional weight and grim atmosphere that contributes to the game's visceral impact. Retcons of major deaths, especially in iconic and beloved stories, often face challenges in maintaining the integrity of the narrative. The uncertain and intense events surrounding these deaths are part of what makes the story so impactful. While minor character deaths may be handled differently to keep the game fresh, characters like Aerith and Zack play pivotal roles in the overarching story, and their deaths are integral to the impact of the story. The possibility of a misdirect or alternative storyline crafted to mislead is always a consideration in whatever may come out of the future installments, and it's possible that the developers are intentionally creating a sense of uncertainty and conflict within the timeline. Fans will have to wait for future games to see how the story unfolds and whether these concerns are valid or if the developers have found a way to honor the original story's impact while still introducing fresh elements to keep the series engaging. Another potential scenario that could unfold in Aerith's side story is that she still dies, but in a different manner. If the storytelling leads players to believe that Aerith might escape her original fate, only to have her meet her demise at the hands of Sephiroth in a different context and in relatively short order, it could still carry significant impact and remain relevant to the overall story. On the other hand, if Aerith were to survive a critical moment, only to have the credits roll and her death occur at a later point in the next installment of the series, it would feel disconnected and less impactful. It could potentially be a less effective way to convey the plot and the emotional weight of the original story. Balancing the unexpected with the emotional resonance of the original story will be key in how such a plot point is executed. Get it? Executed? I'm literally just adding this part because in the previous video I made, people thought I was using an AI-generated voice, so here's me being genuine and unscripted. Alrighty then, let's get back to it. I would briefly like to add that a cliffhanger ending to Rebirth would probably be the best route, but if that is the case, I think Aerith's death should be a settled matter. I can't imagine ending Rebirth prior to the death of Aerith, as it would place her death in a peculiar part of the third installment if the developers chose to write it that way. But to return back to the previous point, imagine the fan backlash and schism in the fan community if indeed she does survive only to be killed again later. I could picture such a situation where fans decry the initial survival as an inappropriate attempt at performing fan service under the premise that the developers would have believed that's what fans want, only to be similarly decried for bringing her back in the next remake, just to placate dissatisfied fans who didn't want their beloved game to be altered so drastically. If Aerith were to survive a critical moment only to face a different, less impactful fate later in the game, it's possible that some players might approve of the game, regardless of the specific outcome. However, I'd anticipate that the majority of fans would likely be unhappy with any possibility of this outcome. Considering the uncertainties and concerns I raised, it's now fitting to counterbalance these negative possibilities on a more optimistic outlook on what I consider to be the most realistic prediction. I think it's a reasonable stance to have faith in the developers, and I believe they will do the right thing, whatever that may be. I acknowledge that predicting every potential change in Rebirth and subsequent sequels is challenging. The anticipation for the release of Rebirth brings a sense of excitement and curiosity about how the plot will unfold. As we approach the release date, it's expected that many of these points and speculations discussed in the video will become clear. Regardless of the specific outcomes, a lasting takeaway from the ideas presented in this discussion is the importance of life and death in the overall story. The impact of character deaths, particularly major ones like Aeriths, contributes significantly to the emotional depth of Final Fantasy VII, and how these elements are handled in the remake series will undoubtedly be a focal point for the fans and critics alike. Even if we were to take a step back from the individual deaths of characters in the story, the importance of the cycle of life and death to the overall story and environment of the game is paramount. One of the takeaways of the theme is that death is not the end, and we are all part of something bigger, despite that we are all subject to the cruel eventuality of our own mortality. This is a theme that carries on in future installments of the franchise, such as Cloud's psychic visions of Aerith in Advent Children. Even though she's not there physically, in the future, her spirit is still with Cloud, both psychically in his mind and in the life stream. And that, my friends, is where I think we should close this discussion. For now, I hope that at the very least, this video makes you think about the importance of death and tragedy in storytelling, but perhaps more so, why this story is so relatable and important in our own lives. Thank you so much if you made it this far in the video, folks. I would urge you to subscribe if you made it this far, as every subscriber is huge as I make my way to full YouTube partner. Regardless of whether you subscribe or not, I'd like to thank you again for taking your time to watch this video. Otherwise, have fun and stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye! Time to turn off that AI filter.